I'm Bernadette Thompson. I'm the Associate Director of Inclusion at Barts Health. I've only been there for 14 months, so I'm pretty new to the NHS. Prior to that, I came from the civil service, 23 years in the civil service across a range of government departments. And before you ask, I was not at any of those number 10 parties in question. Don't ask me any questions about that, nothing to do with me. And I don't even know anything about anything to do with any financial issues. I left finance a few decades ago. I used to lead a debt operation in the legal aid agency, but I got tired of making people cry, asking for money. I decided to come to the profession that kind of loves people a bit more, which is HR. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. It's going to be a bit of an interactive session. So if you're one of those people that tries to multitask, looking at your spreadsheets, I know we're coming to the end of year and all of you will be trying to make all that stuff balance. And I know you always say to us, there's no more money, but try to not look at the emails at the moment, because it might just derail you totally. You might see an email that might just ruin your concentration. Let me try and share my screen, and there will be time for questions. So please, you can either drop your questions in the chat, or you can, when we get to the end, we can just say, put your hands up. Okay, so this is the brief I've been given. We're going to talk about challenging and holding people accountable with regards to diversity and inclusion. And so with all of this, I always start with, well, what is our NHS people promise? Does anyone know? I know I'm talking to finance colleagues, but the people promise, do we know about the people promise? Anyone? Does anyone want to? Yes, the slides will be distributed afterwards. Does anyone want to have a go at the people promise? Anyone? The people promise. What is the NHS people promise? Because we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about the culture stuff, what it matters to the people, but what is the promise to our people? Bearing in mind, all of us on the call are NHS employees. Anyone? Does anyone? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Oh, there are a few people hands up. Okay, right. I can't pronounce your name. Is it Nicole? Nicole?
Hi, yeah. Afternoon, everyone. It's Nicole.
Okay, go for it.
If I remember correctly, Bernadette, it's to do with, I think it's 7 elements that's going to make the greatest difference to what we can do with our staff and their experiences. I may have got that completely wrong, but that's my recollection.
You're right. Yes, you're on the absolutely right track. Does anyone want to share a few of them? Shout a few of them out. Is that you, Jodie?
Hi. Yeah, I think it was written by the NHS people as well. So it's like created by us. And I think there's like compassionate and inclusive is one of them. I know some more, but I'll give other people a chance.
Anybody, but you're absolutely right. And this is why it's really important in what we're talking about today, because we asked for it. They asked us, well, what would make this a fantastic place to work? And we said, this is what we want. And this is why the people promise is really important. So, we are compassionate and inclusive. We are rewarded and recognized. We each have a voice that counts, which means we want to be listened to and heard, 2 different things. We are safe and healthy. We are always learning. We work flexibly and we're a team. And this is what we said we wanted in the NHS. And that aspect on inclusion that we're going to talk about today, we are compassionate and inclusive. It's absolutely critical to people's lived experience across the NHS. And so just looking at where we currently are with some of this compassionate, inclusive, coming from the civil service where we could be a bit gradish, coming into the NHS, sometimes we can be a bit bandist before we ask people's names, or almost first of all saying, so what band are you? But we're all leaders in our own right. We lead conversations and so on and so forth. Yes, we have hierarchical leadership within organizations and within professions, but we all contribute to this culture that we have within the NHS. And Sir Gordon Messenger kind of did a deep dive into the culture. I don't know whether anyone has seen this. If you just Google Sir Gordon Messenger, a lot of stuff will come up. But he found this. He found evidence of poor behaviors, attitudes like discrimination, bullying, so on and so forth. Not really comfortable. People didn't feel comfortable to speak out, and so on and so forth. So there is stuff to be done with the culture in the NHS, and he made his recommendations as well. He prescribed. What was his prescription? Embed inclusive leadership practice, promote equal opportunity. I'm not going to read all of them out. I just give you the opportunity to, oops, sorry, go back, to have a look at them. I'll just give you a second to have a look at them. And so when we talk about diversity and inclusion, holding people to account, we need to understand the why. Why are we doing this? The what is because this is what we see. The why is, well, the people asked, we asked the people for what they wanted, and they told us this is what they want. And so how are we going to make sure, by holding ourselves to account, to get to the place where all of us said we wanted to get to? And so this is my question to all of us, because all of us can lead a conversation on inclusion. All of us are responsible for the culture. There is a strapline that inclusion starts with I. So whilst we do have that hierarchical leadership in the organization, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, all of us have a part to play in this. Because if you look at the People Survey, sometimes the score for bullying and harassment is higher colleague to colleague rather than line manager hierarchy. So all of us have a part to play in this. Now, this model, this picture that you see, we have John Maxwell. He's an American kind of guru with regards to leadership. And he said there are 5 levels of leadership. But this organization, Above Different, cleverly flipped this to inclusion and asked the question, well, what kind of leader are you for inclusion? And I know I'm preaching to the converted in this room, but it's always something for us to think about. Now, are we a level 1? There's nothing wrong with any of the levels. It's not about how you start, it's how you finish. So do you manage EDI as just one of your roles as a leader? Tick box. You have to do it. How many people with disability? Tick. How many women? Tick. How many Black, Asian? Tick. Sexual oriented? Tick. Are we just trying to be data compliant? You're not really an influencer. What is going on there? Are we a level 1? It's all right to be a level 1, but we need to aspire to level 2, where you demonstrate your commitment to the EDI agenda. You lead this because you want to. You're able to articulate the organizational commitment or the profession's commitment, in your case, finance, One Finance, and the ambitions. And you're beginning to use your influence to challenge inequalities. But you can move that on. You can turn the dial up a bit more. Are you proactive? Which means you're taking action, which is really important in driving forward inclusion for people in your team, organization, or in your profession. You understand the link between the quantitative data, which are really good at reporting, but also the qualitative, which is the lived experience. And you're an active member of your EDI committee. As I said, I'm preaching to the converted somewhat. And moving on to level 4, are you an ally for the EDI team, whatever that is in your organization? Are you challenging? Are you beginning to hold the office to account? And we're going to talk about the how. And are you intentional in your communication? Do people know where you stand on inclusion? That should say, do you shadow your inclusion board if you have one, or your committee? Do you actively want to get involved to help shape? Do the employee networks know about you? Do they know you? Are you an ally? And level 5, which is should be all our aspirations. You're respected. People know what you stand for. Yes, you've got your day job, but they know that inclusion is part of your day job. You've woven it into the fabric of being a person in finance. As we're talking about finance, you're making sure you're weaving in But what does this mean through the lens of inclusion? How are we making sure our decisions are equitable? Have we gone out and brought in people that are missing within, this arena? And so you're regularly holding your profession, your team, so on and so forth to account. You represent the organization, and it's great that all of you are here today as one NHS Finance. But just moving that on, talking about inclusion and the inclusion shadow, and these are some ways that you might even hold people to account just by showing this, saying, should we talk about our leadership shadow? What are we saying with regard to inclusion? How are we acting? Does our behavior synchronize with what we are saying? Are we saying something but doing something else? Are we practicing what we preach, so to speak? What are we prioritizing? Are we prioritizing inclusion? Are we championing the right recruitment policies and practices? And how do I measure? How are we holding ourselves to account? Do we ask for feedback? Do we get the feedback and get a bit stroppy because someone told us that we weren't doing something in the right way? Do we take it on the chin and try and be better? And these are some of the things that we can start from ourselves to hold ourselves to account and use it as a tool to hold others to account. But then you see there's several prongs when we talk about inclusion. There's several ways to drive inclusive culture and practice. So we can talk about the broader NHS, the organisation. But then it's really great. I'm really pleased to speak to all of you today because the profession, we have to do the two. It can't just be the broader piece. We have to look at the culture in those professions as well. So it's great that finance is getting ahead of the curve in some of this. I really do love a good quote. Without strategy, execution is aimless. But without execution, strategy is useless. And the issue that we have within the NHS, we've got beautiful strategies, fancy words, but the execution of it, and I always bring it back to our people promise. 7 simple things, you would say. It's a strategy. You could call that a strategy. 7 pillars. But what are we doing? What is the execution? How are we bringing it to life? The people asked us, what do you want? And we said, this is what we want. Where are we on that inclusion pillar? And so there are several different types of people that we need to create change. Generally, there's 3. People generally fit into one of those. You can be an ally for change. You can be an activist for change. And you can be an advocate for change as well. 3 things that we need to do to effect some of the change that we want to see. And so thinking about allies, this is where I'm going to need your help. Because I said it was going to be interactive. And making sure none of you are getting distracted with your emails. What is an ally? You can drop it in the chat or you can put your virtual hand up and you can say, what is an ally? Because we kind of use that a lot. You can type it in the chat or you can raise your hand. And let me just tell you now, I'm not afraid of silence and I'm one of those annoying trainers that will not move on until I get a good proportion of you asking that question, answering that question. A supporter, thank you. Support, someone who supports, supporter, okay. An advocate, aha, but is there a difference? Collaboration, yes. Supporter, any more? Someone that uses their position to support, okay, I like it. There are about 61 of you on the call, so I need a lot more to make sure I know that you're not taking a peek of those end-of-year spreadsheets and reports. Okay, works with others to help and support. You see, the thing about looking at your emails, you've got someone like me that is able to read a lot of facial expressions really well. I know when you've looked at something and you're like, oh my God. Okay, unite for mutual benefit, supporter, support, thank you. Speaks up on behalf of others, absolutely brilliant, thank you so much. Okay, this is what I did earlier. So one that is associated with another as a helper. So yes, support. a person or a group that provides assistance and support in an ongoing effort, activity, or struggle, and so on and so forth. It's often, it continues to elaborate that term, it's often now used for a person who's not a member. So when we talk about inclusion, sometimes these people are not a member of that marginalized groups or mistreated group, but they want to lean in and help. But for us, when we're talking about inclusion, I would say it's the former, supporting the agenda. You're not part of the inclusion team, but you're getting involved. You're making sure we're doing it right. Okay, thank you. So you know the next, and I'm going to ask you, well, then what is an advocate? I don't know what's the difference? And someone actually touched on it in the chat, but I'm not going to say who it was because that would be giving it away now. But what's the difference? Someone who will speak on your behalf. Okay, yes, represent someone. I like it. Absolutely. Any more? All 61 plus of One Finance on this call. Act on your behalf. Absolutely. Indeed. Someone who will speak up for you. Advocate, take a I like that word, proactive. It's intentional. It doesn't happen by osmosis. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your responses. So it's one that supports or promotes the interests of a cause or a group. Advocates are relatively more impactful when they acknowledge and utilize their privilege to engage in those conversations. So the thing about being an advocate, you represent and all of that, but you've got some form of power, privilege. You could be more senior. You could be in places where other people aren't. And so you use all that you have got to help drive that forward. You always bring it into that conversation. You always throw in that element of EDR. You're very proactive. You go out, you find out, and you support. When I talk to finance, being advocates, I say yes. So when we put in our business case from an EDI perspective, you just say, yes, it's worth every penny. I'm just kidding, but you know what I'm talking about. How do you then use your power, your privilege to help drive the agenda? You might not necessarily be the chief exec, but you're in finance, you're an advocate. In every room that you go to, you always circle back to that. You're proactive. You make sure that the inclusion agenda is not swept under the carpet. And then finally, what is an activist? What is an activist? An activist. What do they do? What is an activist? Change agent, absolutely. Campaigner and organizer. Yes, campaigns for change. Yes, absolutely. Actively engage and lead the cause. Yes, yes. They're quite militant, indeed. Indeed. So they act on behalf of solving social and political issues. That's one definition. But, you know, they're at the forefront of this issue. They bring their energy. They act. They kind of sometimes seen as the troublemakers. Oh, gosh. They're going to talk about inclusion again. Oh, they're going to talk about inclusion again. Why are we talking about inclusion all the time? So the activists, they're the person that always, you know, talking about those National Diversity Days, reminding us about the people promising us, reminding us about the fair and just culture, sending articles out to people, reminding people about stuff, bringing the staff survey to life to say we must do better, and so on and so forth. You know, it might well be that they're the people that start off the movement themselves and expect people to join them, you know. But in all of this, they're agents for change, and that's what is important. And we need these three in order for us to shift the dial on inclusion within the NHS, within your profession, in finance as well, as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And so that's just an image that kind of summarizes some of them. And if you Google, I'll put the reference, if you Google her name, you can find some of this. But what we don't want to be is a bystander. We don't want to be unaware either, because there's lots of information on this out there. And we know that what happens when we have bystanders, things become worse, things don't happen, things don't change. The people promised doesn't come to fruition. It's only words on a paper. And so the thing about when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the thing is that we are on different places on this walk. I'm not calling it a journey, because I was listening to a guy called John Amici, and John Amici said, look, if we're on a journey, if you get on the bus 62 bus in Dagenham, it will take you to Marksgate and you will get off. The journey ends. We can not be on a never-ending journey. So I'm calling this a long walk. We're on this long walk to inclusion, to equity, to fairness, to becoming a truly inclusive NHS. But we're all on different stages. And we all started somewhere on that journey, on that walk. And so our approach to people who are not on the same level as us has to be a fair one, has to be a respectful one, has to be a compassionate one. Because you might have gotten this right, but 20 years ago, you probably didn't. You've grown over time. But how can we gently move people along that road? You know, when you're trying to this was a joke during the pandemic. You know, when people were taking their dogs for walks, and after a while, the dog was like, right, I don't want to go for another walk. This is the 20th walk. You know, you're using me as an excuse, and the dog will be like, I'm not going. It's almost like, come on. You know you want to. You know you want. Come on, help me to help you. Come on, let's go. Don't let me get caught and be asked what I'm doing out for the 20th time today. So it's almost like that. How do we gently prod people to say, okay, you're here now, but surely if we do this, that, and the other, we can move here. This is what we really should be doing. I know you're here, but the destination is up there. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. And that's what we're trying to do when we talk about holding people to account. But we all need to recognize that we are at different stages on this inclusion road. And so our approach to people has to be different. And this is where equity, yesterday we celebrated International Women's Day, and the strapline was embrace equity. And what we were talking about is achieving fairness, treating people differently, because we're all different. Can't treat everyone the same, we're all different. But how can we treat people differently on this road of inclusion, just so they start moving along and they get to where we've gotten to, and we move ahead, and so on and so forth. So holding to account, how do we hold others to account? Accountability, the glue that ties that commitment to results. It's as simple as creating goals. It's as simple as that. So one thing we're good at doing is creating the goals, but are they smart? Are they specific? Are they measurable? Can we measure? Are they tangible? Can we measure them? I know we've got the staff survey or people survey. The thing about that, that's a measurement too, but what do we do with it? And that's where the action, monitoring over time. So that's one way to hold people to account, the data. I always say the data doesn't lie. Presenting the data in a respectful fashion, that's really important. So look, with some of the issues we're talking about, there have been decades of neglect. And so I always say to colleagues, don't try and boil the ocean one bit at a time. My former chief exec used to say, I can only measure in 3 things. Let's do 3 things. Let's get those 3 things right. Let's nail them and move on to the next. But let's not try and boil the ocean. We'll try to juggle all the balls, and at the end of the day, all of them would just end up dropping. Let's try. Take one issue, solve it, build on it. Let's move to the next. I know there are a lot of issues, but we need to make sure we tackle them systematically and not try and do everything at once. Educate, educate, educate. Raise awareness. Raise awareness. One of the things that we've done in Barts Health Trust is some really massive trust-wide conversations around some of the issues. Raising awareness. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about disability, LGBT, all of those. Let's get that out. Let's talk about biases. What does that mean? And so we've been doing that for the last 12, 14 months, using the National Diversity Date as a hook. And I don't know whether some of you on the call have attended our event. We just invite everyone. It's a virtual space. We invite everyone to our event, record them and send that out, because you're raising awareness. You're building people's inclusion muscle. They're getting to understand. They can ask questions anonymously without thinking, I don't want to feel stupid, but then you're anonymous. You can ask questions. And we could get to actually start tackling some of the gaps, the knowledge gaps, because gaps exist. Remember that road. We're all at different stages. But how can we build the capability so that everyone is kind of being brought to the same page? So raising awareness, it's great you guys are here today. More and more of these sessions are really important. How do we take that back to our organizations, to our teams? Education is critical. Now, we shouldn't think that education is just a classroom. It could be a blog, it could be a TED talk, but really making sure that that education piece is done regularly. And the national diversity dates, they're the date for everything, you know, and it's a really good way to raise awareness. Surveys. So the engagement life cycle is ask. That's what we do in our people survey. Analyze the data, make the action plan, but act on the action plan. We are always lacking, most organizations, on the acting. We ask, analyze, nothing. Ask, analyze, nothing. And this is why people, oh, well, why should I complete the survey? I completed it last year, nothing happened. And this is why we look at our scores in the NHS more broadly. Our response rates are quite low. Coming from this, I came from a department in the civil service where our response rate was 96% to our people survey. And so when I went to the board on inclusion issues, I'm like, guys, if 96% of our workforce are saying this is what's going on, then it is going on. Whereas if you've got 35%, 40%, a lot of it's left to, well, we don't know about the rest, a few people. And so, you know, that ask, analyze, act, it's a loop. You know, a lot of times we wait, people survey is 2 months of the people survey. Oh, let's quickly remind people that they need to complete it. No, we need to say, what have we done with the information? Otherwise, why am I sharing my information? So that's another way that we hold ourselves to account. Feedback directly on performance. It could be, we have the survey, we cut it by the data, we look, what does that mean for NHS finance? Individual colleagues, leaders asking, how do I fare? What's your feedback on me and why? So being brave and getting that feedback individually on our performance, that's one way. Another way, rather. Get everyone on board, and that's a difficult one. How do we get everyone on board? Well, we make sure that it matters. Generally, what we've done, coming from the civil service, one of the things we've done, made it part of people's objectives. You have an inclusion objective. Could be anything, but it's there because it matters. And that's where, that way you're forced to have the conversation. What gets measured gets done. So if it's in an appraisal, it could be various forms. It could be I've organized an event. It could be I'm part of a staff. It has to be something. It will vary. Remember, we said we're all different. It could be I'm sitting on the finance equality committee. I don't know. But it's there. And when you're having your appraisal discussion, it's part of it. And you're able to share what you've done in that space. And you're getting everyone on board in a roundabout way. At least everyone is talking about inclusion. There might be different conversations, but at least everyone is mindful that it matters. One of my our former cabinet secretary, he passed away sadly, Sir Jeremy Hayward, and he made it a priority, and he really made it a priority. And we're like, oh, I wonder what he's going to do. What's going to be different? And the late Sir Jeremy put it in all the permanent secretaries' objectives, and we're like, okay. And then he made them publish it. And so everyone everywhere could see, I wonder what John Manzoni is doing. I mean, everyone knew all the permanent secretary's objective. And so in the department before I came here, the department I left from, the Department for Levelling Up, what we did is that, well, we're going to follow what Jeremy did. And so we got our senior leaders, or the senior civil servants, to share their inclusion objective, and we published it. So if you weren't going to do it, you are not going to write it down, because even if members of your team didn't ask you, the employee network groups would go to the senior civil servant to say, oh, I noticed you put this down. It relates to my characteristic. What have you done? It's not confrontational. You said you were going to do it public, it's on the internet. We were just asking. You said you were interested in this. And so that was another way for us to get everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. And so our approach, what we say and how we say it matters. And this is where holding people to account in some of this stuff, this is where we really, really need to remember that we're all on different parts of the journey. Aggressive, because that's a way. Telling, why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? Making people feel guilty. You're not even listening to what they have to say. You're not listening to any mitigate. Yeah, you did this, you said this, you did this. How? How are we saying it? Aggression doesn't work. The opposite of that is passive. Well, let's keep the peace. I know the behavior is a bit dodgy, but, you know, let's not say anything. Let's not, you know, let's just, you know, they're having a tough time. It's the end of year. You know, they're trying to, it's really tough for them right now. They've got a lot on their plate. Don't excuse it away. We need to speak up. We need to do something about it. We can't be passive. Well, you know, people are saying that, where's the data? What are they talking about? We're unclear. We're trying to skirt around the edges. You know, we're trying to avoid the confrontation. We're not really clear. What is the ask around this inclusion objective? Well, you know, if you've got some time, you can. We're being a bit passive about it. That's not the way. And then there's always the kind of, again, the hint that, well, if you were doing this, you would know. The way, it's always about the way. And we all know this, you know, that if we want to get the best out of someone, it's not necessarily the what. What I always say is that someone can actually be sacked at work, but the two people that are having that conversation can shake hands and go, because that person knows that that other person has done what they can to keep them in the role. But the circumstances just means following policies, practices, procedures. It's just going to have to end. It's the how. And so the way that I generally prescribe is being assertive, being a bit direct, being firm, listening to what they have to say, listening to mitigating circumstances, holding them to account, presenting them the data. On this date, you did this. You said you were going to do this. It's 12 months now. If there's something, how can I help you to meet those targets? You know, I've spoken to a few colleagues. I looked at the staff survey. The employee network group has spoken to me. You know, your results are significantly lower than the rest of finance across the NHS. There's something going on there that I can support you with. It's the how. It's a direct message that there's something going on there. You know, I'm not judging until I hear what you have to say, but it needs to change. How can we do this together? And that's generally what I say our approach has to be. It needs to be robust. There needs to be evidence, the qualitative and the quantitative, but it needs to be positioned in an assertive but respectful way. And so the combination of how we hold ourselves to account, but our approach to that is absolutely critical in making sure people don't fall off that, as pedestrians don't fall out of that road, they keep on the road. Because if it goes catastrophically wrong, what you find is people will disengage and they're like, well, I can't be bothered, I'm not doing anything anymore. It's always the how. Because it loops back to what are we trying to do? As an organization, we asked, well, how can we help you people? How can we make the NHS the best place to work? They told us 7 pillars. We're just talking about pillar 1 and 2. Compassionate, inclusive. So whilst we're holding colleagues to account, it has to be through the lens of being compassionate, recognizing that with some of this, the day job could get in the way, but showing that we care enough to actually raise it and have that conversation. And so going back to my another picture, the utopia at the end there. We're all on that road. But how we get there is what all of us can shape, because all of us have a part to play in creating an NHS that we would want to work in, making that people promise, especially compassionate and inclusive, come to life. So I'm going to stop there because I've done a lot of talking. It's, gosh, I plan to talk for 40 minutes. I'm 3 minutes shy. I've done a lot of talking, and thank you for you all, for those of you that have interacted within the chat. But the beauty of having these conversations is discussing what's on your mind. So for the next 20 minutes or so, it'll be great to know what's on your mind. There are about 60 of you odd on the call. So what is on your mind? Why are you here? Because we're coming to the end of year. You all could be doing something else in finance, but you showed up today. I don't know why you showed up. So what are you hoping to get from this session? What are those things niggling on your mind that you want to discuss? So you can either put your virtual hand up or type a question in the chat. So I'm going to throw the floor open for questions. Daphne.
Hello, Bernadette. Thank you for that. I was just going to mention that there, within the One NHS Finance accreditation, there are specific things around inclusiveness and diversity and putting measures in place. So that's actually quite helpful to have that as part of it. So I'm thinking about your element around accountability. So that certainly would help promote that. So that's just I'm sure people are aware of that already. It comes within the work stream around finance, workforce and career development. So it's within that element. The other thing I was just going to say is, I guess I would see the role as an advocate actually goes beyond the sort of workforce part and the workforce either within finance or within our organizations, but also, I mean, in finance, we're very much have influence over resources, and I suppose we should be having the inclusiveness within at top of our mind when we're thinking about allocation of resources and also provision of services, making sure that that's taken into account. So just an observation, really.
Absolutely, Daphne, and your latter point is absolutely the right way, weaving it into the fabric of what you do on a day-to-day. You know, how are we allocating? Why are we allocating? Is it the directorate that, you know, shouts the most, or it's something that we're really interested in, that we're warm to, that we're like, yeah, that'd be okay, I'll sign it off. But then if it's another kind of business, do you see what I mean? But absolutely what you said, weaving it into, that is what it is. So Gordon Messenger said, you know, why do people like me exist? All these inclusion people, they shouldn't exist in the organization. He's right. We need to make it, weave it into the DNA of the organization, but we're not there yet. And that's why people like us exist. Once we get it right, I plan to have a career in acting, but it's getting long now. I've been doing this for a long time. We haven't got it right yet. So, but that is the right approach. How could we loop it back in everything that we're doing? Loop it back to what is the most inclusive approach? How can we look at this through the lens of inclusion? So thank you so much, Daphne, for those comments and reflections. Let me check the chat. Oh, okay. Nicole, you've got your hand up, and then I'll come to the chat.
Bernadette, thanks for that presentation. It was really, I really enjoyed it. So I just wanted to share that with you. One of the things I reflect on in all of this is not necessarily the person or the individual that's doing the wrong. It's the person that doesn't say something when they see it. And I sit there reflecting, but I've got loads of examples when I go, what culture have we created for that individual to think it's better not to say something than it is to say something? And I don't know if you've got a thought or opinion on that, but I hope you've understood the question where I was going with that. I have,
yes, and it's not it happens in every organization. It's the fear. If I say, so what I have found is for most very, very senior colleagues, because of their seniority, they might say something. In most instances, they will. Why do people become bystander? Why are people bystander? There's always fear of what is the consequence. What would they think of me? Will this mean, is this career limiting? So you're absolutely right. What culture we created for most junior colleagues is the fear. Well, if I don't want to be a troublemaker, but are they a troublemaker? We said we want to be fair, respectful, compassionate, inclusive. So we need to normalize this. For people that challenge, or people that say, well, this is not what it's simple. This is not what we agreed. This is not in the people promise. And that's what we need to normalize, people speaking up. And it's the culture, but it will take time for us to get there. And that is why we have employee network groups. And I always say to people that if you saw something that, I wanted to speak up, but I'm a bit scared and well, go to your employee network group. What's in the civil service, some of the wins that we have made, they're through the employee networks, because they then presented from an anonymous point of view. Our members have said, in this department, these are some of the things that are going on. We need to address it. And then as we begin to see change, as we begin to normalize it, people will feel more comfortable saying, oh, no, that's not cool. That's not right. But there is still a long way to go. And you're absolutely right. People are scared that if I say something, will I be seen as a troublemaker? It's not. And we need to, no, you're just pointing out that this is not what we signed. I always say, take it away from, take it back to the people promise. This is not what we said we were going to do with our people. We were going to be respectful. We were going to be compassionate. We were going to be fair and just. But there's still a long way to go. So while we are not there yet, how can we still speak up? We've got the Guardian, we've got all of that. We've got our employee networks, we've got our trade unions and staff side. We might not like them. We might think that they are challenging. We need to have them, because if we didn't have them in the organization, a lot of what you mentioned, Nicole, the things that are happening wouldn't be raised. So we need those voices. But again, employee network groups, trade unions, we wouldn't need them if we had all of this right in the organization. But we need to normalize this. We need to normalize some of this. And some of this, I always say to boards that you have to call some of these things out. People need to know at the board where you stand, and where some organizations have made significant, going back to the late Sir Jeremy Haywood, we knew where Sir Jeremy stood. We knew where he stood. The permanent secretary knew that when he was doing their appraisal, he would forensically ask them questions. We knew that he set up a board, a committee where there was someone responsible going in each of those departments to ask them, so what are you doing for it? I mean, it was, I will never forget, it was frantic in a particular department. We're going to get, it was like CQC going to visit. They're coming to visit us. What have we done? Let's get, what is our data? So it's almost like getting to the point where you know that if someone is going to ask you about your patch, it needs to be tidy. And that's when more and more people would speak up. Another thing that we did in another organization was, if something was happening in one bit, they wouldn't report to their direct report. They will go to the direct report's peer. And it was like, and no one wanted their peer to come and kind of tell them off. So they kind of started tidying up their own patch pretty quickly. So they didn't want their peer to say, Joe Bloggs has come to me from your patch and he's saying, it just wasn't a good feeling. And we found that in that organization, it worked. But to your point, absolutely right. We have to normalize people saying things are not right. Now, for me, it's always the how. Yeah, don't be a bystander, but when you are going to speak up, let's speak to the issues rather than say it in a confrontational way. Okay, I'm going to try and go into the chat because I've seen some things. Okay. Ooh, okay, someone, okay. To get ideas on how to help and support EDI. There's a few things. You could just go to your EDI team. What do you need help with? Can I help you in any way? I've got my day job, but I want to get involved. Generally, I always say go and support the staff networks. If you've got staff networks in your organization, they are brilliant. They are critical friends, but they are delivery partners. There's a lot of stuff that can be done via our staff networks. We have all of these topics or issues that people might not want to talk about in the open. Let's talk about race, let's talk about disability. So in smaller groups, manageable groups, with the expert, you can help support. It might be lending your finance expertise to helping the network manage their budget. I'm telling you, me and my networks and budgets, they need a bit of finance help. In order for them to plan so that when they're holding their events, they're not running, they're not scrapping for money at the last minute. So there's several things that you can do. You can join your employee network group. You can volunteer. So you're here, you can volunteer to represent your finance group. You're all here for a particular reason. All of us are intersectional beings. So we're not just one thing. You could support an International Women's Day event, raise awareness. You can share your story. Because in your story, someone will get something from somewhere. They might identify with your background, they might identify with socioeconomic status, so there's always something that you can do. But I always send people to the networks because the networks have their day job and they're trying to support the diversity and inclusion agenda. So any help they can get will be absolutely marvelous. The key, understand the key, so I can advocate for D&I within my network. Absolutely. If there's any particular question, Pushpa, let me know. But I hope I've managed to give you some of the elements here. It's asking questions as well, being curious. If you've got a question and you think it's a silly question, oh God, your networks are really there to help you. Your EDI team you can speak to them on a one-to-one basis, and they will unpack some of this stuff. And some of us are too scared. Oh, I don't want to say something. I don't want to put my foot in it. But if we ask in those safe spaces, it will really help us to build and grow. I've got Jenny here. I'm an ally and an advocate, but I'm not sure. But I don't know how. Hold on, advocate. But how do I know that if I'm doing enough? It's feedback, Jenny. You get feedback from people, and we know that we've got our day job. I'm not going to knock that balancing this, especially if you don't work in an EDI team. But it's going back to something Daphne said, weaving this into your day job, bringing the conversation back. It might be about your people. It might be about your practices. It might be about, like, hang on, guys, can we go and, we're not a very diverse group talking about this issue. Can we go and consult? Shall we run this by our staff network? Some of it might be as simple as that. I train people on cultural intelligence, and there's one particular bit on CQ knowledge, and I always show the advert, an advert that Pringles put out, Ramadan Mubarak, and it was smoky bacon. And quite quickly, that advert needed to be pulled. Now, did the people in Pringles set out to offend? They didn't. As far as they were concerned, Ramadan Mubarak, we are, this is us being inclusive. But who was in the room when there was smoky bacon there? Obviously, there was no Muslim in the room because they would have told them. So sometimes they're not the right people in the room because of how we are organized and so on and so forth. We need to go out and consult to make sure we get the right result. So what I will say is, do what you can. And if you've got some more time, go to your networks, go to your inclusion committee. But I'm sure there's a lot to do within finance. Some of it is even, when we talk about the experience for people, some of this is even, if we look at the people survey in the NHS, we know there are issues around career progression. It might be bringing someone on from a different background, mentoring, reverse mentoring, coaching. There's some people that want to progress, they don't know how. So there's a lot that we still can do, not through the traditional lens of EDI, but how can we build the capability of our people? How can we have a diverse cadre of people? How can we build the pipeline for finance directors, chief finance officer? How can we make sure they're diverse? It's by building the pipeline. And so it's by sharing our journey. It's by opening our network to other people. It's by making time to look at that CV, to look at that supporting statement. So there's so much more that we can do under that banner, Jenny. So thank you for your question. This question, people struggle with how to respond when they're caught or right. How to you never need to be quick to respond, and that's one thing that we need to know. You ask the question, someone makes a comment, it's not a knee-jerk. You can say, you know what, I need to reflect on that, I'll come back to you. Because when we knee-jerk, we might put our foot in it. And sometimes people are not always nice. They try to catch us out with our words. We know that. So, you know, an example, you want an example of how I've dealt, I've been doing this for a long time. So it's very rare that I'll be caught off guard. But if I am, when I am. Okay, I'll give you an example. Yes. So we published our cultural intelligence newsletter a couple of months ago, I think. And it's about cultural intelligence, realizing that culture is more than one thing. And it was during the time of Qatar, during the World Cup. I wasn't the editor, but the editor decided to explain the cloak that was, I'm not a football fan, I can't remember. Is it Messi? Is he was the best footballer? Could someone nod? Safin, you're laughing. Was it Messi that won the highest? Was he the one?
It was, yes.
It was. And he got this cloak that they put around him. And there was some history to that cloak. So this person was trying to say, from a cultural and intelligence perspective, this is the reason why that cloak. But then someone read that article, one of our LGBTQ plus colleagues, and was fuming about the fact that how dare you talk about Qatar and use Qatar as an example for anything, really. The human rights aspect and the way they treat people in the LGBT community is just disgusting. Now, could we have used that example? We could have used another one. So that was, I was directly asked in a public forum on the chat, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Why did we shouldn't have done this? And I said, indeed, we could have used a better example, but please note, our intention was not to offend. Our intention was to talk about culture, and we gave that perspective. And then I went out and said, no, we do not tolerate, we are not saying that what's happened with regard to human rights is the right thing. And so apologies if that offends you. And so there are ways that we can respond in the moment. It's always, it was not intended. I'm really sorry. Yes, indeed, we could have had another take, another perspective on it. But this is what we were thinking about when we were making this newsletter. So always have that point to reflect. Don't rush to answer. People will try and catch you out with your word. Oh, well, you know, we've been talking about this, all these reasonable adjustments and all of these things. Well, what about us that are carers? Does no one care about the carers? And you have some of that as well. So if you're not comfortable with confrontation, you do not feel that you need to answer there and then. Let me reflect on that. I will come back to you. I'm not dodging your question. I just need to reflect a bit more and give you a more measured answer. I don't know everything. People have asked me, people think I know everything on disability and also, I'm like, I'm not an expert on everything. But what I know is that people must be treated with dignity and respect. And if we get it wrong, we apologize. So I will come back to you on that point. But let's note that the team's intention was not to offend. Daphne, your hand's up.
Hi, Bernadette. This was, I was once learned something on a course years ago, and it always stuck with me actually, around if you're in a situation like Natasha is sort of describing, where somebody's made maybe something that's a bit offensive, and rather than say, oh, well, that's an offensive remark you're making, or have a sort of, you know, make a judgment on it, you can say how you feel about it, because nobody can ever dispute that. Because you can say, well, because if you say, oh, that was offensive, they can say, no, it wasn't. Whereas if you say, that remark made me feel uncomfortable, well, they can't say, well, it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. Do you see what I mean? Nobody can actually say they can't second guess your feelings, and it makes it a little bit less confrontational. So that I have found quite a useful tool over the years in terms of getting your feelings across, but not necessarily accusing the other person of. So rather than say maybe, oh, you were aggressive and you were trying to frighten me, you can say, well, I was frightened, because nobody can dispute that if you feel frightened.
Absolutely.
Anyway, just something a little
good point,
learning that I had that always stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good point. You can't police people's feelings. It's their feelings. You can't argue with how I feel. So if I say I was offended, and some of this, when we talk about the workplace, you can't say, but why are you offended? But I'm telling you I'm offended. So what are you going to do? I'm telling you, I didn't like that comment. I didn't appreciate that comment. Well, you shouldn't feel like that, but I do. They're my feeling. Can't police they're mine. They're my feelings. So that's a really good point. Great point. Thank you, Daphne. Claire, I think you will have the last question, because we've run out of time. I don't believe it.
Thanks, Bernadette. Thanks for today. It's been really great. I've taken a lot of learning from it. I'm always wary about making a recommendation, but a lot of the stuff that you put up about activism and advocating made me think of the Knock Down the House documentary on Netflix. So if anyone's got an hour or so over the weekend and hasn't seen it, we've talked about having differences of opinions and that being okay. It is political, so that's why I'm a bit wary. But ultimately, it's about 4 women trying to get into the House of Representatives. And if anyone's sitting thinking, I'm one person, really, like, what difference can I make on my own? What change can I make? It shows you at that grassroots level, the organisers and the campaigners, and the real change that everyone can have, especially when they come together. So just something that I thought I'd throw in there.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I really do like that, your last point. It's amazing what we can do if all of us come together. And so going back to what I said at the beginning, inclusion starts with I. What can we do as an individual? But the more we come together on these issues, the more change that can happen. Looping back to the people promise, we wanted it. It's all for us. It was designed by the people, for the people. And that's what it has to be. Compassionate, caring, inclusive, that sense of belonging. So thank you for staying the course. Thank you for participating. It's been absolutely amazing. If you want to, I'm always happy to talk on all things inclusion. You can find me on the NHS thingy-bobby, whatever we call it, email address, or you can find me on LinkedIn. But I'm always welcome to have a conversation on inclusion and talent management or anything like that. So thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the weekend when you come to it. And those of you involved in the end of year, I will be thinking of all of you. I have been in those places where it's absolutely frantic. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of the week.
Thanks, Bernadette. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Thanks so much,
everybody.
Bernadette.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Becky, do you want me to stay on?
No, you can
Okay.
head off now if you want. Thank you
Okay.
so much. It was really good.
Bye.